It happened in the blink of an eye, something I never thought I would experience, something I never imagined could happen to me, to my family. It was just another normal afternoon. My daughter and I had settled into the calm of our daily routine. She had been through so much in her life already, fighting battles that most people could never understand. As a parent, you always do your best to protect your children, to shield them from harm. But that day, everything changed in a moment I will never forget. We were in our front yard, a place that should have been safe, a place where we could catch a breath, sit outside, and enjoy the sunshine. My daughter, whose wheelchair has been her constant companion for years, was resting under the old oak tree, its shade offering a brief reprieve from the scorching heat of the day. She was content, her face bright with a smile, as she looked at the birds flying overhead, her wheelchair perfectly placed under the tree's canopy. I stood nearby, feeling that sense of peace that only a moment like that can bring. But all of that would be shattered in an instant. It started with a shout. I looked up and saw her, the Karen from two houses down, marching toward us. Her face twisted in frustration, her body language shouting before she even spoke. "You're parked too close to my property line," she barked. The accusation seemed petty, but her tone was aggressive, like she had been holding this anger inside for too long, waiting for a chance to unleash it. I tried to reason with her, as any rational person would do. "We've been parking here for years. There's no need for this," I said, my voice calm, trying to de-escalate what seemed like a completely unnecessary confrontation. But she wasn't having it. She continued to rant, getting louder, her voice growing more shrill with each passing second. "I don't care how long you've been doing it. You're violating my rights, and I'm going to make sure you regret it." The words felt like they had more venom than I expected. There was something unsettling in the way she spoke, something dark brewing beneath the surface. Before I knew it, she was standing right in front of my daughter's wheelchair, blocking the only path between us. My daughter's eyes widened, sensing the rising tension. She could feel the change in the air, the sudden shift from peaceful to dangerous. I quickly moved in front of her, trying to shield her from the escalating situation. "You need to leave us alone," I said firmly, but there was a fire in her eyes, an unyielding anger that I could see was beyond reason. The words were coming out faster now, no longer just about parking, no longer about property lines. "You people don't know when to stop. You don't belong here. You're ruining my neighborhood." My heart started to race, my instincts kicking in. I knew she wasn't just angry, she was dangerous. But even then, I didn't expect what happened next. Without warning, her hand shot down to her purse. For a moment, everything slowed. I thought maybe she was going to pull out a phone, maybe even a camera to take pictures, but no! The cold, hard glint of metal flashed before my eyes, and my blood ran cold. She had a gun. My body froze, my mind racing. I tried to take a step back, but it was too late. In one swift motion, she raised the gun and aimed it directly at my daughter's head. My heart stopped. Time seemed to stand still. The world around me blurred. I didn't know what to do. The only thing I could think of was my daughter, her life hanging in the balance. My first instinct was to get in the way, to take the bullet myself if it came down to it, but I couldn't move. My body refused to cooperate. There she stood, a woman I'd known as a neighbor for years, with a gun aimed at my daughter and a malicious smile creeping across her face. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the absurdity of the situation. This wasn't just a fight over parking. This wasn't just about property lines. This was a woman who had crossed every boundary of decency, a woman who was willing to destroy a life to satisfy her own selfish desires. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice trembling with both anger and something else. Fear, maybe? But she didn't lower the weapon. The gun stayed steady in her hand, pointing directly at my daughter's vulnerable head. "I'll shoot if you move." In that moment, I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I wasn't thinking about the law or the repercussions. All I could think about was protecting my daughter. I wanted to tackle her, knock the gun out of her hand, but my body couldn't react fast enough. My mind was screaming, but My body was paralyzed in fear. "I'm not going to let you hurt her." I finally managed to say, my voice shaking but determined. I could see the madness in her eyes, and it was like nothing I had ever seen before. This wasn't a neighbor anymore. This wasn't just a woman who had a problem with where we parked. This was a person who had completely lost touch with reality. I didn't know what she was capable of, but I knew one thing for sure. She was not going to take my daughter from me. The next few seconds felt like hours, and I couldn't breathe. I kept my eyes locked on the barrel of the gun, my body unwilling to move as I tried to figure out how to talk her down. What was I supposed to do? What could I do? But then, just as quickly as she had drawn the gun, she suddenly turned to walk away, the threat still lingering in the air. My heart was racing, my legs trembling beneath me, but I couldn't let her go without a fight. "Don't you dare walk away," I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. "I'll call the police. You can't do this." She turned back around, a grin spreading across her face. "Go ahead," she sneered. "But you're the ones who look like the criminals. I'm just protecting myself from people like you." The words hit me like a slap in the face. She had already turned the situation around. Now, it wasn't just about the gun anymore. It was about making me the villain. It was about casting doubt on the truth. And I was left standing there, unsure of how to get the justice we deserved. We had always considered ourselves a family living in a peaceful corner of our neighborhood, a place where everyone minds their own business and respects each other's space. But what was once a calm and quiet community quickly turned into a battleground. My daughter, who has been navigating life with disabilities, has faced challenges every single day. Despite the obstacles she deals with, she always tries to find joy in the simple things, like sitting outside and enjoying the fresh air. That day, she was content in her wheelchair, basking under the shade of a tree, lost in her thoughts. I stood by her side, ready to protect her, as any parent would. It was a moment of serenity, a rare chance for us to relax and feel safe in our own yard. But then, the storm came from the one person we had hoped to avoid, the woman from next door, the notorious HOA Karen. She had been a nuisance for a while, always looking for ways to make life difficult for others, always on the lookout for someone to blame. We tried to stay clear of her, tried to ignore her complaints, but on that day, her frustrations reached a boiling point. She marched over to us, furious over something as trivial as the way we parked our car. Little did I know this encounter would escalate into something far more dangerous, something that would change the course of our lives forever. What started as a petty disagreement soon spiraled into a nightmare, one where my daughter's safety was threatened in a way I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. It was a typical afternoon in our neighborhood, the kind where the heat seems to wrap around you like a heavy blanket. The sun was beating down relentlessly, casting a golden glow over everything in its path. Our front yard, which had once been a place of refuge, was now the setting for something far more sinister. I had always cherished these quiet moments when everything seemed still, the world outside my door far away. But on that day, the peace was deceiving. The air was thick with humidity, making every breath feel heavier than the last. The distant hum of traffic echoed faintly in the background, but it was the quiet rustling of the leaves above us that offered any sense of calm. My daughter sat comfortably in her wheelchair, positioned beneath the shade of a large oak tree that had stood in the yard for as long as I could remember. It was one of the few spots in our home where she could feel at ease, where she could sit and watch the world go by, far from the struggles that came with her disability. I watched her closely, making sure she was comfortable, enjoying the small moment of peace that we had carved out for ourselves. The neighborhood was usually quiet, residential, with families who kept to themselves and rarely stirred up trouble. We'd grown used to the sounds of birds chirping, the occasional neighbor greeting one another, the distant hum of lawnmowers and car engines. It was supposed to be a peaceful place. But then, in the midst of that serene stillness, the sound of footsteps broke through. They were deliberate, quick, almost angry. The leaves rustled again, but not from the wind this time. No, this was a different kind of movement. It was the sound of someone walking with purpose, a sound that only seemed to grow louder, closer, until I saw her, the Karen from 2 houses down, storming toward us. The air seemed to change in an instant from calm to tense. The warm sunlight that had been so comforting just moments before now felt like it was pressing down on me, suffocating the peaceful atmosphere. Everything in that moment shifted, and I knew, without a doubt, that something was about to unfold that would shatter the calm of our world forever. It started with something so trivial, something that should have been brushed off and forgotten in a matter of seconds. The HOA Karen, standing there on the edge of our property, accused us of parking too close to her property line. At first, I thought she was joking. Our car had been parked in the same spot for months, and it had never been an issue before. It was a common parking space, one that didn't disrupt anyone's access or cause any inconvenience. But there she was, her face twisted in frustration, pointing at our car like it was some grave offense. I tried to explain calmly, attempting to reason with her. "We've been parking here for years. There's no problem, really," I said, trying to defuse the tension. But instead of listening, her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. She wasn't interested in understanding or compromising. Her voice grew sharper with every word she spoke. "Don't try to talk your way out of this," she snapped. "You've been taking up more space than you're entitled to, and I'm not going to let it slide anymore. This is my neighborhood, and I have every right to make sure things are in order." Her words felt more than just an accusation, they felt like an attack. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about her need to control, to assert power over anyone she considered beneath her. My daughter, who was just sitting there in her wheelchair, looked up at the woman in confusion, not fully understanding the gravity of the situation, but sensing that something wasn't right. I stepped in front of my daughter instinctively, positioning myself between her and the increasingly hostile woman. I wasn't sure how this was going to play out, but I knew I had to protect my daughter from whatever was coming next. The HOA, Karen wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed to feed off the rising tension. Her posture was more rigid now, her hand resting on her hip, as if she was preparing for a confrontation much bigger than a parking dispute. "I don't care if you've been parking there for years," she continued, her voice growing louder. "It's a violation, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it." She took a step closer, her eyes wild with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, yes, but there was a hint of something darker in her expression, something I didn't understand at the time. I could feel my pulse quicken, the adrenaline kicking in. It wasn't just about the car anymore, it was about something much more dangerous. My daughter had no idea what was going on, but she could feel the tension, the unease in the air. She shifted in her chair, looking from me to the woman, her brow furrowed. I could see the fear in her eyes, her face pale, as she realized that the situation was spiraling beyond anything she could have imagined. I tried to reason with the woman again, my voice more firm this time. "This is unnecessary," I said. "We're not causing any harm, and this doesn't need to escalate." But the more I tried to calm things down, the more she seemed to dig in. Her voice grew more frantic, more aggressive, as if I had somehow triggered something in her that she couldn't control. "You people never know when to back off," she spat, her words venomous. "You're always pushing the boundaries. I've had enough of your kind in this neighborhood." Her words stung, but it wasn't just her words that caught me off guard. In one sudden, chilling motion, she reached into her purse, and that's when everything shifted from bad to terrifying. I thought she might be pulling out her phone to take pictures, to document her supposed evidence. But instead, the cold metal of a gun emerged from her bag, and my heart stopped. In an instant, everything I thought I knew about my neighborhood, my safety, and my ability to protect my daughter shattered. The gun was pointed directly at her, at my defenseless daughter who was sitting just a few feet away from this madwoman. It felt like the world had slowed down, the noise of the world around us fading into the background as I focused on the weapon in her hand, the threat she now posed to my family. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you don't stay away." Her words were cold, and the gun was unwavering, its barrel fixed on my daughter's head. The fear I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever known. There I was, paralyzed with fear, trying to protect my daughter from a woman who had completely lost control. What had started as a petty disagreement had turned into something far darker, something I could have never imagined. And as I stood there, frozen in place, I realized that this wasn't just a fight over parking, it was a fight for our lives. I could feel my heartbeat thundering in my ears as the tension escalated. Every word from her lips was like a trigger, building the pressure until it felt like the world was about to snap. The air around us had turned thick and suffocating. The once peaceful afternoon, now a powder keg ready to explode. My daughter, still sitting in her wheelchair, was now completely still, her face pale, as she instinctively recognized that something was terribly wrong. I tried again to reason with her, but each time I spoke, it only seemed to fuel the anger burning behind her eyes. I could see the madness flickering in her expression. This wasn't just about a parking dispute anymore. This woman was no longer concerned with anything rational. Her whole body was trembling, her hands clenched into fists, and her voice was laced with venom. It was almost as if she had completely lost touch with reality. "Enough," she yelled, taking another step toward us. "You think you can just take over this neighborhood, don't you?" Her words were getting louder, more erratic, as she moved closer to my daughter. My body tensed, my protective instincts kicking in. I stepped between them, trying to shield my daughter from her growing rage. But it was no use. Before I could even fully react, she reached down to her purse, and everything went still. It was as if time had stopped. For a split second, I thought maybe she was going to grab her phone, maybe she was going to film the whole thing like some twisted version of reality. But no, my gut told me something far worse was coming. In an instant, I saw the cold gleam of metal, the barrel of a gun, emerging from her bag. My heart dropped. My legs felt weak, as if the ground had been pulled from beneath me. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. The gun was now aimed directly at my daughter's head, her trembling hand steadying the weapon as she pointed it with sickening accuracy. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice cracking with fear and anger. Her hands shook as she gripped the gun tighter, but her aim didn't waver. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. My daughter's eyes widened in terror, her whole body trembling in the wheelchair. I could feel my own body shaking, but I wasn't scared for myself. I was terrified for her. This was my daughter, the one I had promised to protect from all harm. And now, in front of my eyes, she was staring down the barrel of a gun. "Please don't." I tried to say, my voice shaking, but my words felt hollow, useless. The gun was still aimed at my daughter, and every second felt like an eternity. I was paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. The reality of the situation was too much to grasp. This wasn't just a neighborly argument anymore. This was a life or death moment. The world around me seemed to blur as everything else faded into the background. The heat from the sun, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of traffic, it all disappeared, replaced by the deafening sound of my heart pounding in my chest. All that mattered now was the woman in front of me, the gun in her hand, and the precious life of my daughter that hung in the balance. "Don't make me do this," she whispered. But I could see the madness in her eyes. There was no logic left in her, no reason to her actions. She was beyond control now. I had to think. I had to move. But my body was frozen, stuck in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And then, just like that, the world went silent. The seconds stretched on, and I was left standing there, wondering if I would ever be able to keep my promise to protect my daughter. The moment the gun was aimed at my daughter's head, everything shifted from chaos to sheer panic. My body went into overdrive, but my mind was paralyzed. The gun's barrel glinted in the harsh sunlight, and I felt like the world had frozen around us. My daughter, whose whole life had been a series of medical appointments, treatments, and struggles, now had to face the kind of fear no child should ever experience. And I, as her father, was powerless to stop it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the words I needed to say, anything to calm the situation, seemed to evaporate. Every inch I moved toward her felt like an eternity. The woman was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anger. But there was something else, something twisted and cruel. She wasn't acting out of fear anymore. It was like she had taken control of the situation, enjoying the power she held over us. Her grip on the gun was steady, but her fingers were white-knuckled with tension. "Stay back," she yelled again, her voice trembling. The words were directed at me, but I knew they were also meant to intimidate my daughter. My heart broke as I saw my little girl shrink back into her chair, her face full of confusion, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew something was terribly wrong. I looked at her, trying to convey calm through my expression. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice shaking, but I kept trying to reassure her. "Stay calm. We're going to be okay." It felt like a lie as I said it. How could I promise her that when the situation was spiraling so far beyond my control? The woman was getting more agitated, pacing in front of us, her eyes flickering from me to my daughter. She seemed to be enjoying the fear she had instilled in us. I tried to stay calm, tried to think of something, anything that could defuse this situation. The words I spoke felt like a lifeline, but they were so weak against the raw tension in the air. "Please, just put the gun down," I pleaded, my hands raised, palms out in a gesture of non-aggression. "This isn't necessary. Let's talk about this calmly. No one needs to get hurt." But instead of responding with reason, she laughed. The sound was cold, hollow, like something snapped inside her, and she reveled in the control she had over us. "Talk? You think I'm going to let you off the hook so easily? You've been nothing but a nuisance to me and everyone around here. It's time someone put you in your place." Her words felt like they were laced with venom, and I could hear the bitterness in her tone. It wasn't just about the parking anymore. It was like she had been waiting for a reason, any reason, to lash out and make someone else feel her anger. But it was me, my daughter, who was paying the price. The gun was still aimed at her head, the cold metal too close to her fragile body. My heart raced, but I kept telling myself I had to stay composed. I had to protect my daughter. I couldn't lose her. I took one slow step forward, then another, trying to close the distance between myself and her without triggering her to act. My movements felt slow, deliberate, but every step felt like I was walking on broken glass. If I made a wrong move, if I startled her, would she pull the trigger? The fear in my chest was almost unbearable. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but it felt like every option I considered would only make things worse. She was unpredictable, unstable, and I couldn't risk making her feel cornered. I had to be careful, had to navigate this delicate balance between keeping her calm and protecting my daughter. Another step. My hands were shaking, but I kept them raised, showing her I wasn't a threat. "Please," I begged again, "put it down. We can work this out without violence." But she wasn't listening. She was still walking in circles, looking at me like she could see the fear written across my face. "You think you can just get away with anything, don't you?" Her voice was wild now, tinged with hysteria. "I'm done letting people like you walk all over me." I tried to ignore the growing tension in her voice, but it was impossible. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, suffocating me. The air felt thick, like it was becoming harder to breathe, harder to think. My daughter's frightened eyes never left mine, and I could hear her tiny breath quickening in fear. I knew she was scared, and that terrified me more than anything else. "Please, don't hurt her," I said in a voice that was barely a whisper. I was begging now, the desperation creeping into my tone. Every word felt like a lifeline thrown into a sea of chaos. And then, just as I was about to speak again, something shifted in her demeanor. For a moment, the madness in her eyes seemed to fade, replaced by uncertainty. She wavered, her grip on the gun loosening just slightly. My mind jumped to the opportunity. Was this the moment? But before I could act, she snapped back to her original position, the gun still pointed firmly at my daughter. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice breaking this time, as if she couldn't control her emotions anymore. The gun shook in her hands. It was obvious she was losing control, and the fear I felt now was more than just for my daughter, it was for her too. This woman, who had seemed so certain of herself just moments before, was now unraveling before our eyes. Every second stretched on like an eternity. My daughter still looked at me, her eyes pleading for help. The gun was still there, but there was a slight crack in her resolve. The tension in the air was thick, the moment hanging in the balance. Would she snap? Would she finally pull the trigger? Or could I get through to her before it was too late? I could hear the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. Relief washed over me, even if only for a brief moment. The police were finally coming. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when the truth would be revealed, when someone with authority would step in and stop this madness. My mind raced with thoughts of how I would finally be able to explain what had happened, to show the police the woman who had threatened my daughter, who had pointed a gun at her. But when the police car pulled up and the officers stepped out, everything shifted once again. I had hoped that justice would come swiftly, that they would see through the chaos and recognize who the real aggressor was. But as they approached us, my heart sank. The woman, who had moments ago been a raging lunatic with a gun pointed at my daughter, was now calmly walking toward the officers as if nothing had happened. She greeted them like an old friend, her voice smooth, controlled, and with a smile that felt as though she had orchestrated this moment for days. "Officer, I'm so glad you're here," she began, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "These people have been threatening me. They've been harassing me for months, causing trouble in the neighborhood. I've tried to be patient, but now they've taken it too far. They're the ones who made me feel unsafe." I stood there, stunned, my heart in my throat. Was this really happening? Was she really turning the whole story around and portraying us as the aggressors? My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. She was making us out to be the ones who had caused all of this, the ones who had threatened her. It didn't make sense. I felt my stomach twist as she continued her narrative, her eyes glancing at me, smugly satisfied with how everything was playing out. The officers, who had been walking toward us with authority, now seemed hesitant. One of them glanced at me, then at her, clearly trying to make sense of what was going on. My blood began to boil. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't looking at her with suspicion, they were looking at us. They were questioning me now, not her. The woman had manipulated the situation so skillfully that she had completely shifted the narrative, and I could feel the weight of injustice pressing down on me. I tried to speak up, to explain the truth. But before I could even get a word out, she cut me off, her voice loud and insistent. "They threatened to hurt me, officer. They came onto my property, harassed me, and when I told them to leave, they got aggressive. I was only protecting myself." I felt my world crumble. The truth, right in front of them, seemed irrelevant. The police weren't hearing me, they were hearing her. And in that moment, everything I had hoped for, justice, support, protection, seemed to slip through my fingers. The authorities had arrived, but instead of delivering justice, it felt like we were the ones who were under attack. I stood there, frozen, as the woman spun her version of events. Each word that came from her mouth, a calculated lie designed to destroy everything I had fought for. Her voice, once full of fury, was now cool and collected, as though she had been preparing this story for days, weeks even. The officers who had been so quick to arrive were now listening to her as if she were the victim, as if she were the one who needed protection. I felt a sickening wave of disbelief crash over me. "She's lying," I wanted to shout, but the words got stuck in my throat. How could they not see the truth? How could they listen to her lies, knowing the danger she had just posed to my daughter? The gun, the threats, it was all real. My daughter had been terrified, her life in immediate danger. But now, here I was, being treated like the criminal. The officer nodded sympathetically, his expression softening as he turned toward her. "We have a witness," he said, glancing over at the woman with what seemed like genuine concern. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. A witness? A witness to what? To the fabricated story she was telling? I looked at the officer, my mind spinning with confusion and frustration. I tried to speak, tried to interrupt, but every time I opened my mouth, she cut me off. "They've been harassing me for months," she continued, her voice smooth and convincing. "Every time I try to talk to them, they get hostile. Today, I had no choice but to protect myself. They were on my property threatening me, trying to intimidate me. The officers weren't hearing me. They weren't seeing the truth. They weren't listening to my desperate pleas. Instead, they were nodding along, as if they believed her every word. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten as the words came out of my mouth in a weak attempt to explain what had really happened. But I started only to be silenced by her louder voice. "She's lying." I wanted to scream, but it was useless. She had already cast doubt on everything I had said, twisted the entire story into one where we were the aggressors, and now the police seemed to believe her. Her narrative, woven with deceit, had begun to take hold, and I could feel the injustice pressing in around me. There was nothing I could do to stop it. The truth didn't matter anymore. The woman's false narrative had already taken root, and the officers were buying into it. I stood there, helpless and exposed, watching as my own words, the truth that should have been enough, seemed to vanish into thin air. The feeling of betrayal, of being unheard, overwhelmed me. All I wanted was for someone to see the truth, to protect my daughter, but instead I was left with nothing but the sting of injustice. I couldn't take it anymore. Every word from her mouth, every glance from the officers felt like a betrayal. My body trembled with frustration, the weight of injustice crashing down on me. How had we ended up here? How had the truth become so irrelevant? I stood there, my hands shaking, watching as the woman who had threatened my daughter was treated like the victim, and we were being treated like the criminals. The anger inside me surged, but I couldn't let it control me. My heart ached as I glanced at my daughter, who was still sitting in her wheelchair, the fear still in her eyes, the confusion still etched on her face. She didn't understand why this was happening. She didn't understand why the people who were supposed to protect us were listening to someone who had pointed a gun at her head just moments before. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about us anymore. It wasn't just about this one woman or this one confrontation. This was about a system that had failed us, a system that let the truth be manipulated, twisted, and buried. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I took a deep breath, feeling the tears I had been holding back threaten to spill. But I wiped them away, replaced by a fire that burned through my chest. I wasn't going to let my daughter's fear, my pain, our suffering go unnoticed. I was going to fight, not just for her, but for every person who had ever felt powerless, unheard, or unseen. This wasn't over. It was just beginning, and I would make sure the truth came to light no matter how hard the fight would be. In the days that followed, I felt like my world was crashing down. The weight of the police's dismissal, the feeling of helplessness, and the disbelief that no one seemed to care about what had actually happened to my daughter were almost too much to bear. But then, something shifted in me. The overwhelming sense of injustice became a catalyst. I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't let that woman get away with what she had done, and I couldn't stand by as my daughter's safety was disregarded. We didn't let it go. After the police left, I sat down and began to collect every shred of evidence I could find. The photos I had taken of the scene, the video footage from my phone that captured the moment the gun was drawn, and even the testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed the altercation, everything had to be documented. I knew that if I was going to fight this, I had to have proof, irrefutable evidence that told the true story. At the same time, I reached out to a lawyer. I didn't know how we would go about taking legal action, but I was determined to find a way. The lawyer was sympathetic to our situation, and after reviewing the evidence, they were confident we had a solid case. The woman's actions were inexcusable, and the law should have protected us, but it had failed us. This time, though we were going to make sure it didn't happen again. We filed a formal complaint with the police department and pushed for an investigation into her behavior. As we pursued legal action, I also took steps to make sure our story was heard. We reached out to local media outlets, explaining the incident and the way it had been mishandled. The press coverage gave us a platform to share our side of the story, and it created a ripple effect. Slowly, the truth began to surface. People who had kept quiet, neighbors who had seen the situation unfold but were too afraid to speak up, started coming forward with their own experiences. It turned out that this woman had a history of harassing others in the neighborhood, creating chaos wherever she went. It was like a chain reaction. One person speaking up gave others the courage to do the same. The more the truth came to light, the more people started listening. The public's support began to build, and the pressure on local authorities to act grew stronger. As the media picked up the story, the police were forced to reconsider their initial response. They reopened the investigation, and new evidence emerged that backed our claims. The woman's false narrative began to unravel piece by piece. And then it happened. The woman was finally charged. Her actions, her threats, and her reckless behavior were brought to light, and she was held accountable for what she had done. It was a bittersweet victory. Yes, we had won, but the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. Looking back, the journey we went through was long, painful, and exhausting. But through it all, I learned the power of resilience. I had never imagined that one day I would have to fight so hard just to protect my family's safety and truth. But I realized that sometimes you have to stand up even when it feels like no one else will. That's what I did for my daughter. And in the end, it was that determination that turned the tide. We came out stronger, more united, and with a renewed sense of justice. My daughter, although scarred by the experience, now knew that her voice mattered. We had faced the worst and survived, and that made us unbreakable. We were no longer the victims of that day. We were the warriors who fought for our truth, and we had won. What we experienced wasn't just a personal struggle, it became a larger battle for justice, for truth, and for the well-being of my family. In those moments of fear and helplessness, I learned a hard truth. How easily the truth can be twisted, how easily those in positions of power can be swayed by the most convincing story, no matter how false it is. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that sometimes what's right doesn't always prevail in the face of manipulation. But that doesn't mean you give up. If anything, it means you fight harder. One of the most important lessons I learned through all of this was the undeniable power of perseverance. At times, when it seemed like the world was against us, when the police dismissed our claims, and when it felt like the woman's lies had taken root, I wanted to give up. The emotional toll of fighting an unjust system while trying to protect my daughter was overwhelming. But then I remembered my daughter's face, the fear, the confusion, and I knew that giving up wasn't an option. Perseverance wasn't just a choice, it became our lifeline. We couldn't let her win. We couldn't let her narrative, no matter how convincing, become the truth. This experience also made me realize the depth of what family really means. Family is more than just the people you live with. It's the people you fight for, the ones you stand beside, no matter how hard the journey gets. My daughter's vulnerability, her innocent trust in the world, and the love I have for her drove me to stand tall when I wanted to crumble. It wasn't just about protecting her physically from harm, but emotionally from a world that didn't seem to care. That's what family does. It gives you the strength to face impossible odds and keep going. And in the end, I learned that justice doesn't always come easily, but that doesn't mean you stop fighting for it. The truth may be buried under layers of lies and deceit, but eventually it will rise. Justice isn't just a legal concept, it's a moral one. It's about doing what's right even when it's hard, even when it feels like no one else is listening. In the end, the truth prevailed, and we prove that standing up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is worth every ounce of effort. If this story resonates with you, if you believe that no one should ever be bullied or threatened, especially when they're just trying to live their life, then it's time we make our voices heard. Hit that subscribe button, share the story, and let's stand together. HOA denied access is here to shed light on the injustices that too many people face. People like my daughter who simply wanted to feel safe in her own home. I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever faced something like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going, and let's make sure that no one ever feels powerless again. Together, we can fight for what's right.